think it's inherently antagonistic. So the reason security guards are here, I think that's entirely warranted.
Got all these death threats and rape threats, and I was terrified.
We are all organizing as a single voice, a loud voice.
It's time for us to quit apologizing for being for men's rights. It's time for us to quit apologizing for being men.
It's commonplace and it's everywhere, and the more you start to become conscious of it, the more you realize that it's there.
I don't lack sympathy for any of this.
The red pill is about looking at these issues in an honest way, even when it's uncomfortable.
And I think what feminism did very, very well, as Fred Hayward said, it recognised that women's work wasn't valued in the same way that men's work. And also the whole idea of analysing gender relations and how gender and power are intertwined was very, very valuable. I learned a lot from my feminist professor, and one of the things I learned was actually from zoology. I thought has changed the way I see a lot of things. When the Victorian explorers went to Africa and they saw lion pride, they talked about the male lion and his harem of females. And this was fitted straight into the thinking of the time, that the man was the head of the household and he had all these women. And then feminist zoologists looked at it and said, no, what's going on here is half a dozen females are keeping one alpha male as stud, and they're getting rid of all the others. Now, I then went to work in health and social care, and I came in all these departments where the team leader or the head of the department was a man and everyone else was female. And they're saying, oh yeah, but the man's in charge. And I'm thinking, hang on, he's the one having the heart attack, trying to deal with all the money, to raise the money for all the women to go off and pursue their projects. So I was very interested, very grateful for feminism, allowing me to see things through a completely different lens.
But these men, like, surely if they're at the top, they're getting paid the most. So it's not, I wouldn't say poor men at the top, but...
No, but if you, what I'm saying is I'm grateful for feminism, enabling me to see that it's not just the one that people nominate as being the leader who is actually in charge. It's actually easier for a lot of people. I've met men who say this: play the number 2 position, let someone else take all the grief, then you can just get on and do your job. And even at Bristol University, I went to do an identity MSc. I couldn't complete it because it was entirely feminist biased, and I went to the bursar and I got my money back. It was just so biased, it was appalling. But he said to me that feminism owns gender studies, and he was the head of the department, and he had 8 women in that department all pursuing their own research, and he was the one having sleepless nights and breaking down trying to fund it. They didn't have to worry. You sort the money out, I've got this to do. And because of the feminist gender analysis, I was able to see that a completely different way, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Sorry, you just made me think of some completely new points. Sorry, it might be a long one. Okay, I was just thinking about my experience. I have an 11-month-old baby, and I meet up with mums with babies. I hope you'll stick with me with this. And a lot of the conversation is about maternity leave and the negotiation, going back with their employer and blah blah blah. And the whole time I sit there thinking, how nice for you to sit there and have this lovely problem. It's nice. They have maternity leave and they can go back and ask for part-time work and they can do this, they can do that. And then one of them's husband was trying to have one day off a week so he could spend more time with his son, and his job has been threat because they don't want him to. Yeah? So, you know, she's trying to fight that for him, and I admire that in her. But he's also upset with that situation too. But he's not sitting there with his buddies going on about how nice it is, how they have all this choice, that they can go back to their employer and they can complain to the tribunal if they don't get their negotiated hours if they want. How nice they all get to sit there with their babies discussing this lovely issue that they have. And I think it's great that they can do that. But at the same time, they all seem to sit there and not realise this little circle of, dare I say it, privilege that they're all talking about. Yeah? And then I've had conversations with them, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure I'd want to go back full time because I don't really want to have that much responsibility. I might get more money, but that means having more responsibility. I don't really want to take that promotion because I'll have more responsibility. I want to be at home with my children, or I just don't want that much responsibility because I want to go on holidays and I don't want to work 12 hours a day. Unfortunately, in my experience, I don't hear men talking like that much. They just don't seem to want to have jobs with less responsibility in the same way. They're not all men, but they don't necessarily always have the choice. And women now have that choice. They can go for a CEO, and they can not go for the CEO. And a lot of them, I am finding, don't want to be CEO. Yeah? They just don't want to. Most of them. There's always that one alpha female that wants to do it, and good for her. And that's what I think feminism has helped. Because I think in the past, when Erin was younger, there was quite an authoritarian way that family and society was run. Everyone stuck to their roles and no one questioned each other's business. Domestic violence was like a private thing, and I think the barriers of that have been broken down, and that's a good thing, because now we can start talking to each other a bit more. And I also think that technology was improving, so that came about at the same time, and also like therapy and psychotherapy and the way that we examine psychology with each other and how we can empathise with each other improved as well. So all of that happened about the same time, and feminism just rode that wave. Yeah?
I think you
That's
have to
my
remember.
opinion.
Sorry.
The best thing feminism done for me is allowed women to go out to work and support themselves, so that men don't have to support them, and it's liberated me
If
to
they
look
want
after
to,
myself.
the choice.
They have the choice,
Yeah.
then less so.
And
But
then
I
that's
think
like
that's
exactly.
been very good. It has taken the burden off of men to support women because they can go and support themselves. There are so many people now asking the questions, and we've skipped over Jordan.
Well,
What's
yes,
yours?
that's okay. I've got two things, really awfully quick. One's an answer to a question from the audience, and one's a question from the panel.
Why don't you get up and look that way?
I've got a face for radio, so please don't get too scared. So who was the guy, was it around here, said about if feminism hates patriarchy so much, why they keep going for big handouts? It's not feminism in general, it's the feminists in power. They claim patriarchy, but they love it because patriarchy provides for them, it gives them money, it gives them handouts. That's why they keep the dad out of the house, because they can get the state in to then give them all the benefits. Women's aid do that massively. They take so much money from the government. They celebrated all of their website and they got a huge 40 million grant. And I think it was, I got an anecdote in my head, I forget who told it to me, but I think the story went, Warren Fowle spoke to Gloria Steinem after they had a victory. And he said, yes, this is great, we've had this victory, we're making progress. And she was shocked. She was like, we can't be making progress, then we'll have nothing to fight for. We won't get any funding. She was shocked at this. Which differentiates us from them, because when we have progress, we celebrate it. Yes, we keep going, let's do the next thing. Because we want the men's movement to be a finite movement. Because we want to be able to solve the issues, everything to be fine, and then go home, carry on doing our jobs. So that was my answer to your question, and then now my question to the panel. Sit back down. You mentioned briefly about a gender war and how there's sort of not one, but I was at the Battle of Ideas a couple of weeks back, and one of the panels was about are millennials scared of sex? Because millennials are now having less sex than their counterparts in the 60s. And they didn't really get to the answer to the question. I thought the answer was, it's not like they're scared of sex, they're scared of each other.
And that's quite true.
Yes. Do you think this fear between the two sexes and how it's manifesting could possibly potentially lead to an implosive gender war? And how would it happen?
Men won't fight women. Men, that's one of the reasons why this has happened over such a long time.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a reciprocated gender war, is the implication of
Oh, you mean, but women declared war on men 50 years ago. didn't they? It was simple.
We're just not very good fighters.
Women? Oh, women are far better fighters than men. You know, the thing is, men might be physically stronger, but women are emotionally a great deal stronger.
I think with one thing of optimism for me about the men's movement is that there's a new sexual revolution just around the corner. There are now 4 types of male contraception about to come onto the market.
Yes.
2 hormonal, one blocks the vas deferens, and the other one is a little plastic switch where you can just turn off the vas deferens. No more sperm. Next day you can turn it back on again if you want to. And I think that is seriously going to change the power balance in the gender war, when men can decide, no, I'm not going to take the risk. We don't have to use condoms, you don't have to take the pill, it's on me now. And I think that will start to change the balance, just the way the pill changed the balance in the 1960s. So I'm really optimistic that it doesn't have to be a war, or it's certainly not as unbalanced as it is now. There's so many questions. I think it was you next.
Oh, right, okay, I've actually got 2 questions. So the first question is this one. I read a couple of months ago that I think it's Nottinghamshire.
That's right.
Yeah.
Are looking at
hate crime.
Yeah, setting up a unit to record crimes.
I think while we've got this time together, I think we have to get away from gentler sides of all this and go down to the real side.
I agree.
That Mark is very lucky he didn't kill himself. We have lost so many men because and how many men who suddenly go off to work, suddenly they find that they are barred from ever going home, they can't see their children, they have been accused with no evidence of, and a lot of lawyers, women lawyers particularly, will say, go for physical abuse. Or now, of course, it doesn't even have to be physical abuse, she can just ring up and say, I'm frightened of him. You've lost your home, then she can say, oh, by the way, he's molested the children, gone. And I'm very, very urgently aware that it's easy to get diverted from the really, really serious side. There'll be men here, and some women, who know exactly what I'm talking about. The reason why we're going to have such a problem with relationships between, no man in the right mind is going to let a woman move in with him, let alone marry her or have children by her, because look at the price you're going to pay. I just think there has to be a huge amount of education as well, particularly towards men. The chivalrous gene in men, I don't want to eradicate it. It's an important part of being men. But I want them to understand, when they see that little hurt woman bird fluttering her wings on the road, you fall in with her, or she's a bit of arm candy that makes you feel more of a man, and you've put your head in a noose that you have no idea how violent it's going to get. And the tragedy is that if a woman gets by exactly the same, I know I can help this man, and she gets herself in, she will have all the sympathy right the way across society. She'll be offered money, she'll be offered somewhere to live, she'll be taken care of. Men, nothing. Mostly times they'll be told that they're perpetrators and it's his fault anyway. And I do think we have to stay with this discussion. And this is why I think the film is so brilliant, because Cassie has managed both ways to ask questions on both sides. There isn't anywhere it hasn't been brainwashed and people haven't been told that men are the enemy. And the other thing that we don't often talk about, which to me is absolutely vital, is that if you leave personality disordered people in charge of children, men or women, you are going to have the children being used as missiles in the war that partner is waging against her other partner. And I deal with that all the time. And to me, it is now being recognised as child abuse, gross child abuse, to destroy a man and women. I mean, it can happen both ways, but it's a very dangerous thing to do because you destroy your children.
Okay, thanks. Over there, and then one over here, and then Jordan. Yeah.
It's a quick question, but first of all I want to say thank you to Erin Pitsey, because you taught me a lot about 3 or 4 years ago when I came across what she'd done. I knew your work from earlier, when I had feminist girlfriends in the 80s, heard your name, but I didn't realise how much you'd done in such a great way until recently, so I want to say thank you very much for that, because it's brilliant. And I've got a question, quick question about education. My daughter's now in her first year of being a social worker. I'm worried when she comes back at Christmas about Invasion of the Body Snatchers because her head will be transformed into something. That's what happens. They come back completely changed. It's not just feminism course, it's also Marxism, Maoism, Trotskyism, communism inside universities. It's a kind of Ponzi scheme where the professors with tenure get people in and they work for nothing and then they rise up and this is all paid for. And that's happening to millions of people across the world. What do we do about education to change it? Because I'm generally worried when I see my daughter, she won't be the girl she was when she went away. She'll be transformed by the professors into being a different character entirely.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Before, I did a degree in media and cultural studies and journalism, and that's partly why I'm here. Because I left and I thought that was bullshit. Why did I study that? And in fact, I spoke to my dad about it recently, and this is interesting. That this is something that I've noticed, when Erin's noticed as well. I said to my dad, "What on earth was I thinking? Why did I study that? Because I wanted to be a journalist, but why did I do the media and cultural studies part?" And he was like, "Well, I was thinking at the time that it probably wouldn't get you a good job, but I didn't want to say anything." And I was like, "Why wouldn't you want to say anything?" And he kind of admitted that, you know, it's not kind of trendy for a dad or a man to kind of tell a woman something different to what she might be thinking or give a different opinion. And that was quite enlightening to hear my dad say that, and me and him have quite a good open relationship. But having gone through, I would call it the process, the system, I was questioning it all the time. I was being told that feminism was about equality, and then I was actually studying it, and then at the same time I kept thinking, but wait a minute, how can you take personal responsibility for yourself and be accountable when you're blaming it on this kind of weird system called the patriarchy all the time? So I would say about your daughter, if she has a good relationship and is able to have empathy for others, and if she's got a man like you who's here, she probably does, then she probably will question it at some point. So I wouldn't worry too much. But it is really disheartening that she's going to go through something as noble as being a social worker, and then she's going to get told about the Duluth model and get taught all these ideological theories that don't necessarily have the evidence to back them. And then on the field, she's going to encounter lots of horrible women and horrible men, but she's not going to be able to question the women as the way that she's men. So.
Well, that's good. Thank you very much. I mean, I did a fine art degree, so I had a Maoist, a Marxist, a Trotskyist, a Stalinist, and something else is the feminist as my teachers. So I was brainwashed in college and changed. So it is possible.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And more now, I think, than ever before.
Yeah, more now.
My question is mostly to Erin. Since you've like highlighted, I mean, you basically write the book on basically helping people transcend like childhood things in life. The way I see it, feminism is, I mean, there are good ones, but I don't think they're ever going to be saved in terms of the good ones. Because I mean, take Cassie J. You know, she saw the light and she dropped the label. But very few of the good ones. So I think it's more important to focus on like the men's movement and keeping that house clean, so to speak. What would you? I mean, we know how to deal with children, but in dealing with adults who have like personality disorders and are trying to get them to transcend. I mean, you can't force somebody to do something, but there's a lot of men in the manosphere, whether they're MOM, MGTOW, all sorts, that have very serious issues. Now, I think it wouldn't be in our. We have to keep our house clean and not making the personal political. But at the same time, I don't think it's wise to essentially just push them aside. So, what would you say is the best chance of, I don't know, trying to help them transcend?
I think for a lot of men who have anger issues, once you start working either with men or women, as I do, and you start laying out the strategies they've learned as a child. I'll do this personally. I was an enormously violent child. When you are tiny and you are born into what is a war, you have to decide how you're going to survive this as a child. Now, you may use the strategy of, like my twin sister, she used a completely different strategy. She did what I call hibernated. So when it kicks off, she would actually go down like this. She'd have migraines, all sorts of horrible issues. And she had a running eczema, and she hid. I came out fighting. I just became more violent than either of them. And I was a terribly violent child. And I wrote a book called Infernal Child about the strategy. So that's why when the violent women came into the refuge, I was comfortable with the violent women because I knew what was happening. And all I'd be able to start by saying is, look, you're in this position. You know that you beat your husband up as much as he beats you up. So let's have a look at how it is you're dealing with it. Because in the refuge, she was exploding. So you see, the trouble is what you're doing is your strategy. You go from pain and frustration directly to rage. You have no idea how it's possible to actually move from pain and frustration to sorrow and sadness, because no one's ever helped you or comforted you when you were suffering as a child. And that's the beginning of the march, because we just judge everybody and we're cruel to people who have come from those childhoods, who have no other option because that's all they've recognized. And maybe when she comes to me, she's 40 with 5 grossly disturbed children. And she has to, and if she'll choose, to re-educate herself and to learn different, harmonious, loving patterns. That's where you get the changes in both men and women. But before we begin on the therapeutic side, which is what I believe in, I had an enormous therapeutic community. And I owned houses all over England. We owned the Palm Court Hotel. We were the biggest squatting agency in England. But I do want to talk and ask any of you, have you suffered like Mark has? And he will tell you, is it Alison Pearson? Anderson Sanders. Does that make any sense to any of you? Yeah. There you go, Mark. You were going home after work.
I mean, I don't know how many of you know this story. I just find it bizarre that it happened to me, and I'm just scared that it could happen to somebody else. I was walking home from work through Waterloo Station, and I walked past a woman, and I took half a second to walk past her, and 2 months later I was arrested for sexual assaulting her, which is bizarre.
Carry on, Mark.
How? I was supposed to have put my hand down up underneath her skirt as she walked past.
And trousers.
And she was wearing leggings and underwear, and I was supposed to have put several fingers into her vagina for 2 or 3 seconds and then punched her in the shoulder and carried on my way. And she didn't report this straight away. She just went to work and then came back to the station a couple of hours later and said, this has happened before, this has happened before. And the person she spoke to thought she was a bit strange, so she just directed her to the transport police, and that's when she made the accusation. And she made a statement a week later, a video, and she said the guy was 6'2" and had hair, and everyone stopped on the platform and looked around, and she screamed. And fortunately the CCTV footage of this shows that none of this happened, and yet the officer in charge automatically believed her. This is the new system. This is listen and believe. You have to believe a female victim. They call them victims, but I mean they're just complainants. But they're automatically treated as victims, and guys are automatically treated as guilty. I was treated as guilty from day one. So something's gone radically wrong with the whole judicial system. Not just the police, the CPS. I mean, it was passed on to the CPS. They looked at it several times and they still thought that I'd done something, even though we had the CCTV analysed by an expert to prove that it took less than a second to walk past the room.
What did they say
if your solicitor or lawyer said to them, her original statement said you were 6 foot tall, you had hair, I screamed, people looked. But this CCTV shows none of that happening.
They didn't question it.
Do you think the feminist movement has done anything good? Is there anything you like about us?
Yeah, I do. I do. Because I think it's a split movement. Equity feminists. I was an equity feminist. Men are equity feminists. Equality for women was very necessary in my time. Because you had to remember that you had to show doctors your marriage, your potential marriage, before you could get contraception. Yeah, and there are issues like that. So that's why I was so hot on the idea. But I was different to everybody else because I was born in China. My parents went back to China in 1942 and were captured by the communists and are held under house arrest. So when I saw this cultural Marxism, which is what the gender feminists are on about, I recognized that this was nothing to do with ordinary women.
So that's why I want to get this into education. I don't know.
Well, good luck. There are advantages. See, I think you have to follow the money in this whole 50-year saga. To me, it's the biggest fraudulent movement of the last century and now this century. That money was ring-fenced in Washington, as I said, all those years ago, as the left women turned on their left partners and said, from now on, we were not going to fight against capitalism with you. We are going to create our own movement, and from now on, you are the enemy. And it actually, in its own way, tore apart the whole of the left-wing movement. It was a very interesting time. The problem here, and I can say in England, for instance, nearly 300 million, am I right? Thank you. Women's Aid. 300 million goes to National Federation of Women's Aid and Refuge. The woman who runs a Women's Aid, a refuge, that's my old refuge, she earns 170,000 a year. And we're talking huge money invested. And of course, as men pay 75% of tax, men are paying for all this. I think we have to get away from what's called the gender war, because there never was a war. I think we have to get back to looking at, as far as we're all concerned, the majority of people in this country understand completely that generational family violence is the root cause of all domestic violence, virtually all of it. That takes it away from the money-making opportunities that we have given the feminist movement, the gender feminists. And when those of us in the very early days, and I was one of the very early people who went to the meetings that were called, where we were asked to get together in collectives, call each other sister, and that our husbands were oppressing us, I was one of the first ones to stand up and say, but this is nothing to do with ordinary women like me. I'm happily married, I've got a house, I'm delighted I can be home with children. And then I just stood up and said, hey, hang on a minute. This has nothing to do, this is not a women's movement. You've told us that you're there for equality. It has nothing to do with equality. It has everything to do with money, control, and power. And so I think we've got to keep that in mind, because we can get terribly distracted by saying, let's all meet in the middle. At the moment, until the money is shared, you would not get a foot across that door. Believe me, 50 years of my life have gone into this. And I think we have to be very realistic. And I think actually it is turning. This is the most hopeful thing I can tell you, is that more and more people are talking about generational family violence. And those of us who, no fault of our own, are born into violent families and have either violent mothers or fathers or both, in my case both, we know what it takes for us to transcend the violence. The very radical feminists, most of whom I know Gloria Steinem, I know so many of them, most of them have had have never transcended their own family violence. So if your dad's a shit, all men are shits. And that is something that they have to deal with. And I do think the most important thing we can do is get behind Cassie, because I think this is an absolutely brilliant film. And in fact, there aren't that many questions that she hasn't answered. And I think that if it's going to go on Netflix, I think that's going to be a huge game changer. But let's pray that it does get on Netflix. So that's me answering. I'm sure other people have got other.
I wanted to ask the panel, actually, and Erin's answered some of that by saying it's about money. My question was going to be, who does this benefit? Who benefits from having fathers separated from families, paying for mothers to be at home, producing children, raising them? How does this benefit? How does it benefit society? I mean, I'm a single dad. I've got custody of my kid, despite the bias in the system. I'm also an absent parent, as it's called. My other two children live with their mother, same mother. So I see both sides of what happens in the family courts. I've seen both sides of what happens with the CSA. I've seen how social workers work on both sides. And I think the entire thing's about money. I think, not just with domestic violence. I think the whole thing's about money.
Well, yes, because think of the thousands and thousands that goes in, to particularly into the hands of the courts and the social workers. I mean, there are more social workers. My daughter's a social worker, so I can say these things, and she's a good one. But think of the social workers who have all been feminized. I mean, this is the problem. You've had for so long there was no pushback, and as slowly as Women's Aid did all the training of the police, all the training of the judiciary, all the training of all family agencies. So it's embedded and it's deep.
I brought social workers into my family because my partner was neglecting and abusing my kids. She still got custody of the two youngest ones. And my social worker told me that they were taught that in 90% of cases the man is the perpetrator of the violence.
That's right.
And so they looked in my situation for ways to turn the things I was saying back round onto me.
I know hundreds and hundreds of men who've been through this, and I've been there with them. And the first man that I began to realise how serious it was, he killed himself down the road from the refuge. His wife was in the refuge with the children. And the young policeman came up, and he said, "I'm afraid you're going to have to sit down," to the woman. And he's very young, and he began to tell her. He was shaking. He said, "I'm afraid your husband's in the car, and he's committed suicide." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, that's a relief." And the policeman had to sit down. He was so shocked. But the most frightening part of it all was as I walked round, because his body had been taken away, some of the children came with me, and they'd heard what was happening, because the policeman, it was a very crowded room, as you saw in the film. And that's when I realised there had to be a men's aid, there had to be a place for men, but not a penny would any of the men who had the money and would put their hands in their pockets for women and children, not one of them would put their hands in their pockets for men. And I think that says something very, very deep about how men deal with the fact that if another man is weak, he will help him. If it's business, he'll help him build bridges. And I've said this to so many men. But the moment it's a question of helping him over emotional issues, men don't know how to do it. Some men do, and it's certainly better now with younger men, but I promise you, there's one of the biggest problems, is men actually being able to get together and create a very strong, efficient men's movement. And that really is what we need. Not a movement against women, a movement that actually understands the real issues behind all this, and I keep saying it's money. It's billions and billions and billions of pounds. And that's where the fraudulent, and that's the only way we're going to stop it, is to take the money away, and they'll leave. They're not there because they care about women and children. They're there because that's where the money is.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, with the, electing Trump in the US election, and also with the subsequent death of the mainstream media, and with social justice warriors all across the world in a complete state of meltdown, I think this is a time for us to become emboldened and to stand up for, what we believe in, and, to put our names as well, on the plates to say, yeah, this is who I am, this is what we believe, this is what I believe in. What's your take on this?
You'll probably get banned from Twitter.
Opportunity to benefit from a crisis, I say. And here, this is why this film is so valuable and the timing is so important, because there is turmoil and a new order needs to come out of that. And we need to be very vocal and organised while that's being sorted. Otherwise, the inertia will go back to the way it was before.
How about, I was just thinking, I'm looking over, there's Mike over there. Buchanan, you're doing something about it, aren't you? Could you tell everybody?
Yeah, okay, well, I think some of you know Mike Buchanan, party leader, Justice for Men and Boys. Erin spoke at our conference back in July. We had people from 20 countries, and people do understand, I think at least people who follow my party, that feminism cannot be negotiated with. It's a female supremacy movement driven by misandry, the hatred of men. And to me, the idea that you can negotiate with feminists, or that feminists will cede power to men and boys, it's as fantastic as Jews in the Second World War thinking the Nazis would help them. That's the way I feel about it.
I'm really sorry, we're way over time already.
Where's the hope in that message, though? I don't understand this.
I'm not here to spin hope. I'm here to tell people how it is.
How do we move forward if it's just a constant gender war? You were saying that we've had for 50 years. How can we possibly move forward if it's just feminists are cunts and there's no way forward? I just don't get this.
I think
we lost the gender war 30 years ago.
How about trying to sort of
agree,
engage and negotiate and take advantage of this status quo?
Yeah.
Well, I think the film does that.
How's it working for you so far, Mike? It's just like throwing rocks at each other.
I think it's
What's
about
the point? Where do we get forward?
Getting young women to listen and empowering young men to
That's
talk.
exactly what I want to talk about right now before we finish.
That'll have to be the end, I'm afraid, because of the time.
I'm here because I have a huge empathy for men, but I have my own personal agenda, which I am pushing out, is that I would like to start trying to get more women to talk about how feminism and how this gender war, as we're talking about, and the men's rights stuff is affecting us and the men in our lives, and for the women to take the lead on it. I don't think we're going to go and get anywhere unless that happens.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Unless, yes. And I personally am working on something, my own project to do with that, which is connected to Erin, but it's not necessarily Erin's thing. So yeah, when that comes out, hopefully you'll hear about it personally. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion, because I think lots of men now are starting to speak out, and then once you've got a group of women, you've got a group of men, they're saying the same thing, they get together, and that's when things can move forward. And also the other side point I have is I really would like an academic to develop their own ism, which is like a counter theory to feminism, and it might exist already, maybe someone could tell me.
Egalitarianism, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, why don't we...
May I offer a term?
Why don't we have a term?
No,
but that common sense, no, it needs to be an academic theory, because the model that's worked so far, remember, is everyone's accepted that feminism is factual. Yeah? They've accepted the arguments.
May I offer
Can you give a counter argument?
Can you just let him say something, please?
I'd just like to offer one term in response to your question.
It's important.
Try humanism.
Yeah.
We're all part of the human
I agree.
race.
Exactly.
On that note, I'm really sorry, but going to start charging me more money if I don't. Pardon? Just say network for men.
Yes,
say
just
one thing.
one last thing before we pick up, and I'm going to be quick. We talk about men coming together and doing stuff. There is the network for men, for guys to join to meet like-minded people. There will be the network for women, hopefully coming out soon. Watch this space. But yeah, any guys who feel connected to any of this and want to get involved, want to meet other people, sign up at the network for men, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.